Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the most extraordinary lives in early Islamic history. A man born in chains, who rose to become the voice of an entire faith. We're diving into the life of Bilal ibn Rabah, the first muezzin of Islam. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations. You've just arrived in the city of Mecca, sometime around the year 580 CE. The good news: Mecca is alive with trade, caravans, and the smell of spices drifting through the narrow alleyways. The bad news? Depending on who your mother is, your entire life has already been decided for you before you've taken your first steps. Bilal was born into slavery. His mother, Hamama, was an Abyssinian woman, captured, enslaved, and sold into the ownership of a man named Umayyah ibn Khalaf, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Mecca. There was no ceremony for Bilal's birth, no celebration in the streets, no father placing his newborn son on his shoulders with pride. Just another child of a slave woman, catalogued quietly into someone else's property. He grew up in the Banu Juma quarter of Mecca. If you closed your eyes and stood there on a warm morning, you'd hear the distant sounds of camels, the haggling of merchants, the laughter of freed children playing in dusty courtyards. But Bilal belonged to none of that world. He was tall, dark-skinned, Abyssinian like his mother, his hair thick and wild. His voice, and this is the detail that history remembers above all else, his voice was something else entirely. Deep, resonant, clear. A voice that seemed too large for one man. A voice that, at that point in his life, was used only to carry out orders. For decades, Bilal lived the life of an enslaved person in 7th century Arabia. He hauled goods. He served. He endured. He had no say in where he slept, what he ate, or how he spent his hours. And yet, something inside him remained unbroken, something patient, something quiet, something that would one day shake the walls of Mecca itself. Around the year 610 CE, something strange began to happen in Mecca. A merchant named Muhammad, a man known for his honesty, his calm, his reputation as Al-Amin, the trustworthy, began speaking about a message he said he had received. One God, no idols, no masters, no slaves. You can imagine how that message landed among the powerful men of Mecca, the tribal leaders, the owners of the Kaaba, the merchants who profited from the city's religious economy of idols and pilgrimages. They were not pleased. They had everything to lose. But for people like Bilal, that message was something different entirely. Bilal heard it, and he believed. We don't know exactly how Bilal first received the message of Islam. Perhaps he heard Muhammad speaking in the markets. Perhaps a free believer whispered it to him quietly, carefully, knowing the risk. Perhaps he heard it and lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of whatever place he was made to sleep, turning the words over and over. One God. No masters but God. For a man who had spent his entire life as property, the theology of Islam wasn't abstract. It was personal. It was revolutionary. And Bilal embraced it, openly, bravely, and without hesitation. That bravery would cost him everything. When Umayyah ibn Khalaf, found out that his slave had converted to the new faith, his reaction was not confusion or curiosity. It was rage. In Mecca at this time, the early Muslims were a small, persecuted minority. Most of the believers who faced punishment were the poor, the enslaved, the marginalized, those who had no tribal protection, no powerful family to shield them. Bilal had none of that. Umayyah's punishment was designed to break him. Under the blazing heat of the Meccan sun, and if you have ever stood in the Arabian Peninsula in the height of summer, you understand what that sun feels like. Umayyah would have Bilal taken out into the desert. He was made to lie on his back on the scorching ground. A massive boulder was placed on his chest, and then Umayyah would stand over him and say simply, "Renounce Islam. Say you worship Allat, Al-Uzza. Just say the words, and this ends." And Bilal, lying there, stone crushing his ribs, sun burning his skin, would say one word, Ahad, one, referring to the oneness of God. That's all, just Ahad. Day after day this happened, the boulder, the heat, the command, and each time, Ahad, just that single Arabic word spoken through cracked lips with whatever breath the stone allowed him. There is something almost impossible to fully comprehend about that kind of endurance. Not the physical pain, though that alone was extraordinary, but the clarity, the certainty, to be pressed into the ground and still find in yourself not anger, not despair, but just that one word, that affirmation. Bilal was not performing courage for an audience. No one was watching, cheering, writing it down. He was alone in the desert, with a boulder on his chest, and he chose Ahad. One day, a man named Abu Bakr was passing through the market district of Mecca when he saw what was being done to Bilal. Abu Bakr was one of the closest companions of the Prophet Muhammad, a wealthy merchant, a man of means, and a man of deep conviction. He stopped, he watched, and then he walked directly to Umayyah ibn Khalaf. The negotiation was brief. Abu Bakr bought Bilal's freedom, paying an amount some narrations describe as generously above market value, because Umayyah, sensing leverage, initially tried to increase the price. Abu Bakr paid it without hesitation. When the Prophet Muhammad heard what Abu Bakr had done, he said something that has been recorded and passed down through centuries. He is our master, and he has freed our master. Bilal walked out of slavery into the sunlight of Mecca as a free man. He was perhaps in his early 30s. He had spent most of his conscious life as someone else's property. And now, with Abu Bakr's intervention, he was free. But freedom in Mecca in 614 CE for an early Muslim was not exactly peaceful. The persecution of the believers continued. The community was small, hunted, pressured, and Bilal, now free, deeply devout, and with that extraordinary voice, was about to find his purpose. In 622 CE, the Prophet Muhammad and his companions made the Hijra, the migration, from Mecca to the city of Yathrib, soon to be known as Medina. This is one of the defining moments of Islamic history, so significant that it marks year 1 of the Islamic calendar. Bilal made that journey. Picture the caravan moving through the night, keeping to less traveled routes to avoid detection. The desert was cool at night, sharply, suddenly cool after the brutal days. Dates and water carried in leather pouches. footsteps muffled in sand. Bilal walked into Medina as part of a community that was building something new. In Medina, the early Muslim community was constructing the first mosque, a simple, open-air structure of palm trunks and mud brick, nothing like the grand mosques that would come centuries later. And as the community settled, a question arose that seems almost quaint from a modern perspective, but was quite practical at the time. How do you call people to prayer? Various suggestions were made. A bell, like the Christians used. A horn, like the Jews used. A fire, visible from a distance. The Prophet Muhammad, according to narration, received guidance through a dream. A man in the dream called out to prayer using his voice alone. A call with specific words, repeated in a particular pattern. And when the Prophet described what he had heard, someone said, "Bilal's voice. Give those words to Bilal." Bilal climbed to the roof. In 622 CE, in Medina, the rooftop of the mosque was the highest accessible point in the neighborhood, a flat expanse of dried mud and palm leaves, the desert sky above absolutely enormous and sharp with stars. He stood there, and he raised his voice. "Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! God is the greatest. God is the greatest. God is the greatest. God is the greatest. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness that there is no God but God. I bear witness that there is no God but God. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulallah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Hayya ala as-salah. Hayya ala as-salah. Come to prayer. Come to prayer. Hayya ala al-falah. Hayya ala al-falah. Come to success. Come to success. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. Those words, spoken for the first time in human history by that voice from that rooftop, roamed across the city of Medina in the pre-dawn air. The community rose. People stepped out of their homes into the cool morning. They turned toward the direction of prayer. Bilal, the enslaved man who had been pressed into the Meccan sand and answered with Ahad, that same man was now the voice calling an entire community to God. For years, the Muslim community grew in Medina. Conflicts came, the battles of Badr, Uhud, the Trench. Alliances shifted, tribes negotiated, and gradually the balance of power changed. In 630 CE, 8 years after the migration, the Prophet Muhammad led the Muslims back to Mecca, not in conquest of vengeance, but in what is historically remembered as a remarkably restrained and merciful entry. Most of the people of Mecca who had persecuted the early Muslims were pardoned, including Umayyah ibn Khalaf's family, including the people who had pressed boulders onto Bilal's chest in the desert. And on that day, the Prophet Muhammad walked into the Kaaba, the ancient cube-shaped structure at the center of Mecca, and the idols that had filmed it were removed, one by one. Then he turned to Bilal, and he asked him to climb. Bilal climbed the Kaaba itself, the most sacred structure in the city. the structure that had been at the center of Meccan religious and economic life for generations. And from its roof, he called the Adhan over Mecca for the first time. Below him in the courtyards were people who had once owned him, tortured him, tried to break him. And above them, his voice rang out over the city. Allahu Akbar. Some of the Meccan nobility who had not yet embraced Islam were reportedly appalled. An enslaved man, a foreigner, calling out over their city from their sacred building? Some of the Muslims in the courtyard were weeping. Bilal stood on the roof of the Kaaba and called the world to prayer. In 632 CE, the Prophet Muhammad passed away, and something broke in Bilal. He had been the Prophet's muezzin, his caller to prayer, for 10 years. The relationship between them was profound and personal. The Prophet had referred to Bilal as one of the people of paradise. He had said he heard Bilal's footsteps ahead of him in a dream of the afterlife. After the Prophet died, Bilal tried to call the Adhan once more in Medina. He got to the words, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. And he broke down, completely. He could not finish. He told the companions that he could not remain in Medina. The city held too much. Every corner, every street, the mosque itself, all of it was unbearable without the Prophet. He was given permission to travel to Syria, to the city of Damascus, where many of the Muslim soldiers were stationed for the ongoing expansion of the early Islamic State. He lived there quietly, away from Medina, away from the Adhan. He called it only twice more in his life after that. Once when Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph, visited Jerusalem and asked Bilal to call the prayer over the newly opened city. The companions who were there reportedly wept openly at the sound of his voice. The grief of memory, the weight of everything that voice carried. And once, according to some narrations, when he visited Medina one final time and was asked by the grandchildren of the Prophet to call the Adhan for them. When his voice rang out again over Medina, that same deep, resonant, extraordinary voice, the city reportedly came to a standstill. Women stepped into doorways. Men stopped in the streets. It was as if time had briefly run backward. Bilal ibn Rabah died around 640 CE in Damascus. He was perhaps in his 60s. He had been born into slavery in Mecca. He had been tortured in the desert for a word, Ahad. He had been purchased and freed. He had walked to Medina in the dark. He had climbed the roof of the Kaaba and called out over the city of his enslavement. He was the first muezzin of Islam. The man whose voice, 5 times a day in mosques across the world, is still echoed by the call he first raised nearly 1400 years ago. Tonight, if you listen carefully, somewhere in the world, right now, someone is calling the Adhan. In a mosque in Istanbul, in a neighborhood in Cairo, in a village in Indonesia, in a small community center in London. That call traces a straight, unbroken line back to a rooftop in Medina, and a man who answered torture with one quiet word. Ahad. Slip into sleep slowly now. Let the story settle. And wherever you are in the world tonight, you are part of a much longer, much older, much more beautiful story than you might realize. Good night.